The first thing we're going to talk about on page 4 is called the square root property. So if you have an equation and you take the square root, a lot of times we only talk about the positive answer. But when you take the square root of a number, you actually get 2 answers. So can you write that you always get 2 answers? You get 2 answers when you take the square root. The calculator gives you what we call the principal root, which is positive. But notice in our packet, it says that the square root of 49 is actually positive 7 and negative 7. Okay, so that's going to help us when we solve these examples, because there are 2 answers whenever you take a square root. 2 answers when you take a square root. So yesterday we talked about solving and finding the x-intercepts. Remember, Mr. Suchi said there's 4 different words for x-intercepts. One is 0, root, solution. They all mean the same thing. So this is our first equation. We're going to solve it for x. Now, because this is the only thing that we have on the left is a parentheses and a square, we're actually going to start by taking the square root, because what's the opposite of squaring something? The opposite of squaring a number is taking the square root. So I want you to go ahead and draw the square root on both sides. On the left side, all that's going to do is eliminate the parentheses and this exponent. It's going to get rid of that. And on the right side, what is the square root of 25? Anybody know what number multiplies against itself to give you 25? 5. 5 times 5 is 25. But not only is 5 times 5 25, negative 5 times negative 5 is also 25. So the square root of 25 is really positive and negative 5. There's 2 answers. Whenever you take the square root, you get 2 answers. So we need to break this apart and solve it separately. So my first equation is x plus 7 equals positive 5. And my second equation is x plus 7 equals negative 5. So we have to solve this equation twice. How do you do that? How do I solve this equation? If I want to get x by itself, what would be the opposite of adding 7? Subtracting 7. So pick up your calculators. Go ahead if you need to. Figure out what 5 minus 7 would be. What'd you say, Juan? Negative 2. So x equals negative 2 is that would be one of my x-intercepts, so one of my roots, one of my zeros. But there's another answer. We're going to do the same thing with our second equation. We have to subtract the 7. All right, what do you get when you type negative 5 minus 7? So negative 5 minus 7 would be negative 12. All right, these are that's my x-intercepts, and you don't have to write this down, but these represent my x-intercepts, my roots, my zeros, my solutions. That's what these 2 numbers would represent. All right, let's look at question B. For question B, that's a little different than the first one. Because there's a 3 right here. And because this 3 is right here, we have to get rid of the 3. How do I get rid of the 3 that's being multiplied by x squared? What's the opposite of multiplication? Division, yep. So we're going to divide both sides by 3, which is going to give you x squared equals 9. And now we need to take the square root. So when we take our square root, we get x squared. It doesn't just equal 3, because we always get 2 answers when we take the square root. So what would be my 2 answers? Positive 3 and negative 3. That shouldn't say x. It should say x squared. I mean x, not x squared. So x equals positive and negative 3. Or you can write it separately and say x equals 3, x equals negative 3. So you can either put that plus minus in front to show that it's 2 different answers, or you can separate them. And that would be your solutions. Any questions so far? All right, let's go ahead and go to the next page and solve a couple more. So when I solve this one, let's take the square root of both sides. And that's going to give me y plus 5 equals. Now, is 21 a perfect square? If you look at your multiplication chart, is that one of the numbers that would be on the diagonal? No. Okay. So we're going to leave it under the square root. So it would be plus or minus the square root of 21. Now, in your calculator real quick, can you grab your calculator and type in the square root of 21? Cortez, it's a calculator under your desk, and there's also a couple in front. You might have, yeah, there's one there. So go ahead and type in the square root of 21. When you type in the square root of 21, does it just say the square root of 21 again? Okay, so I want you to find, can you all look at me, because we're going to use this a lot. Right above the enter key, do you see that little, it looks like 2 triangles? Hit that button. And that's how you get a decimal answer. So if you type in the square root of 21 and hit that, you should get a decimal answer. Who sees 4.58 in their calculator? Raise your hand if you got that. If you didn't, keep your hand up, and then I can come around and help. So y plus 5 equals plus and minus 4.58. That's the number I'm trying to get to. Raise your hand if you need help with your calculator. So the square root, you have to hit the green key. And then you see this little symbol right there? So you have to hit the green key first and then hit that. Then type in 21, hit enter, and then this button changes it to a decimal. Anybody else need help? Can you show her what I just showed you? All right, so square root, hit the green key. We got to clear that out. Hit the green key. We might need to help them with putting in a square root in the calculator, because they've never done that before. So hit the second function and then hit x squared, which is you see how there's a little square root of it and then 21. And then change it to a decimal. You have to hit the button. button above enter.
Okay, cool.
Hit this button. King, you need help? You need help on it? Over here, you all need help? Because we're going to use this square root key a lot, so. All right, hit the second function, the green key, and hit x squared. That's how you get that symbol. Then put in the number, hit enter. And then the number, this means, that changes it to a decimal. Okay, that's really good that we got that out the way because we're going to use that square root key a lot. So when we break it apart to our two answers, you're going to break it apart to, so now my two answers are decimals. So you have y plus 5 equals positive 4.58. And then you also have y plus 5 equals what? What's my second? Negative 4.58. Now we only have to do this when we don't get a if it's not a perfect square. So how do you solve both of these for y? What are you going to do? Because it says y plus 5. And what's the opposite of adding? Subtracting. So let's subtract the 5. And your first answer, when you type that in your calculator, take 4.58 minus 5. You should get negative 0.42. That's my first answer. Now do the same thing with your second equation. Subtract the 5. So put negative 4.58 minus 5. And you should get negative 9.58. And that would be your two solutions. All right, any questions about how we did that? All right, I want you to try to do the next two by yourself. Now, these two should be a lot easier because 16 is a perfect square and 49 is a perfect square. So you won't have decimals. So take a minute and try to answer both of those questions. All right, take a minute and check your answer with my first one. Raise your hand or give me a thumbs up Thumbs up if you have both of those answers. All right, so when you take the square root of 16, the square root of 16 is equal to positive 4 and negative 4. So we're going to break the equation apart. You have x minus 2 equals positive 4, x minus 2 equals negative 4. And to solve, because it's subtraction, we're going to add. So when I add 4 plus 2, I get 6. And negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. All right, try to do this next one if you haven't already. Now, 49 is a perfect square, so we won't have a decimal. So take a minute and try to find your two answers. Take the square root, break it apart, and solve. All right, so let's go ahead and check our answers. All right, raise your hand or give me a thumbs up if you had x equals 3 and x equals negative 11. Who had that for their two answers? All right, that's pretty good. All right, so again, 49 is a perfect square. So we have x plus 4 equals positive 7. X plus 4 equals negative 7. So we're adding 4. And the opposite of adding 4 would be to subtract 4. So positive 7 minus 4 is 3. And negative 7 minus 4 is negative 11. So what we're doing is working through different methods to find our x-intercepts. So this is one method. Factoring, which we've talked about a lot, is another method. So now let's go back to factoring, which is what we did yesterday. So before you can solve an equation by factoring, this is really important to use this method to solve, because now we're trying to solve by factoring. You always make sure that it's set equal to 0 first. All the terms have to be on one side of your equation. So go ahead and fill that in your notes. Make sure that it's set equal to 0. Okay, so when we look at this one here, and we're going to use the methods that Mr. Suchi talked about yesterday, the methods to factor. Okay, and the first step is always look for what? What's our very first step? Look for a GCF. Okay, so when I look at example 3, first of all, is it set equal to 0? Yes. Okay, so now let's look for a GCF. 4x squared, and then 12 can be broken down to what? 4 times what is 12? And if you're not sure, take out your charts. Let's take out our earbuds and put away our phones, please, because I need everybody to lock in. 4 times what gives me 12? So 4 times 3 is 12. So all I did was rewrote that equation, but I broke it down so we could take out our GCF. What is my GCF? 4 and what else? X. So let's go ahead. We can take out a 4x. I could take out a 4x. So that comes on the outside. And then on the inside is what is left over, which is x minus 3. These are my factors. Now, normally we would stop right there, but we need to solve to find our x-intercepts. So to do that, you're going to set each factor equal to 0. So let's start with this one. Take 4x, set that equal to 0. And then our second factor, x minus 3, we're going to set that equal to 0. Go ahead and solve both of those equations. So we have two equations that we're going to solve for x to get our two answers, our two x-intercepts. So if I'm multiplying by 4, what's the opposite of multiplying by 4? Dividing. So we're going to take this first equation, we're going to divide by 4. Does anyone know what 0 divided by 4 is? 0. So x equals 0 is my first, I have an x-intercept at 0. And my second factor is x minus 3. So I'm going to add 3. And 0 plus 3 is 3. And that would be my two solutions. These are my solutions. All right, let's go ahead and continue. I want you to take out the GCF. Take a few seconds. Take out your GCF. And I forgot to mention that we need to make sure it's set equal to 0. But this one was already set equal to 0. So what would be my GCF? What can I circle? What do they both have? 5 and what else? All right, good. Let's circle that. So that 5x comes on the outside. And then we make our parentheses. And what would be left on the inside? X minus 5. Good job. So now we're ready to set both of our factors equal to 0. So 5x equals 0. Go ahead and solve that for x. And x minus 5 equals 0. Go ahead and find your two solutions. All right, so in the first one, you would divide by 5. And what is 0 divided by 5? 0 divided by any number is what? 0. Good. X equals 0 is your first solution. And then for my second equation, how do I solve that for x? What do I have to do? Add 5. Good job. So that will give me x equals 5. All right, last one for today. Go ahead and do B if you haven't already. out of this. All right, so who started off by taking out the x? Who did that part? All right, good. So you took out the x. So our factors would be our first one is just x. So x equals 0. And notice that it's already by itself. That's my answer. I don't need to do anything to solve it. X equals 0 is my first solution. For my second solution, though, I do have to move it around a little bit. X minus 12 equals 0. How would you solve that for x? What would you do? Add 12, yep. We would add the 12. So then x equals 12 would be our answer. All right, so we're actually going to end there. I'm going to pass out homework 2. Homework 1 is due today. If you have it, you can show it to me to get your points. For homework 2, though, we still have quite a bit we need to cover. So I'll go ahead and tell you which numbers to work on for the last